I will convene the January 28th, 2026 meeting of the Finance Committee. And we're joined tonight by Tom Lincoln, and Deputy Town Manager Raymond, who will be presenting the budget for us. And I'll just turn it over to you two. I will get out of the way so people can see. So take it away.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. Pleasure to be here. I'll be in a different environment and atmosphere than typical, but we'll certainly make it work. I'm very pleased to be joined this evening by the somewhat newly appointed Deputy who I believe this will be her first time appearing in this capacity here. Obviously, it's a very familiar face in terms of the town's finance and probably cross paths with many of you during her tenure here. We have a very brief slide deck. Obviously, we will have plenty of time for questions this evening as well, and welcome them. If there's something we don't know, we will certainly get back to you. We can sort of jump to the next slide. First one here. So tonight we'll talk about the budget process. We folks are all veterans and very familiar with the process, so we can go quickly through that. But this is the similar slide that was used for the select board and members of the public on Monday night. Sort of an overview of, at the highest level, of what the FY27 budget looks like. Some of the things that we want to highlight about the budget, and then what the next steps are going to be in the budget process. So, you know, from the top, and if you folks have read the book and the budget message, it was made clear that this FY27 budget is override contingent. Select Board has set a date for the override vote of March 28th. And obviously, if unsuccessful, this budget as submitted, we need to see some revisions, i.e. reductions to a number of the lines contained therein, because we have to prepare and present a balanced budget to town meeting, which again will be early May, as it is in nearly every other year. So with that, and knowing that we were facing an impending override vote, both myself and the school superintendent back in November imposed a hiring freeze for all non-essential positions. And at the same time, had been engaging in a quite lengthy and robust long-range planning process, of which a number of you attend those meetings to sort of hone in on what the ask of Arlington's voters will be on March 28th. And I am slated to give a recommendation to the select board on what had been February 10th, that is now being moved to February 12th. Given that we've learned that the Group Insurance Commission will be contemplating some key major plan design changes at that meeting, that if all of which were implemented would have a fairly significant impact on health insurance premiums. So will also spell bad news for employees, meaning they would stop covering GLP-1s for weight loss, they would increase deductibles by $250, increase co-pays across the board, increase co-insurance. So provide a lot of cost savings on the premium side, but potentially put it onto the backs of employees. So we're awaiting their votes on 2/12 to see what will transpire. I know they're already facing significant pushback from a lot of employee organizations and unions on some of what they're contemplating, but it would have a meaningful enough impact on our deficit that it's worth waiting those 3 additional days, because if there are additional savings to be had in terms of what we have to ask for in the override, it is important to pass those on to the taxpayers and voters. So in the big picture, we're looking at on February 12th, making through the number will be. So without further ado, I'll let Julie walk through the annual budget process.
Great. So the budget process is a year-long process. The summer is when we start collecting requests from our department heads, both for capital and operating budgets. We then spend the fall meeting with department heads. We're talking about what their spending has been like over the past couple of years. We talk about staffing. We talk about potential efficiencies and also go over any budget requests or budget reductions. So that's October through December. We're then to like this point in the process, right, where we submitted the budget mid-January on my birthday, in fact. And then we spend, January through April coming to all of you with, for several different meetings. You all are having budget committee meetings. And then by the end of March, and this year will be the very, very end, we will have the financial plan, which is essentially the manager's budget, which is, mostly the numbers, right? It's mostly staffing and expenses, but we then pair that with accomplishments, goals, performance, workload indicators from the departments themselves, giving a broader picture of what the work looks like for the residents in general, town meeting members specifically. Obviously, then you all submit your report to town meeting, and then in May, town meeting will vote on the budget itself, and then it's June, and we're wrapping up the fiscal year and starting it all over.
So we'll do a quick walkthrough of the revenue side of the equation. So we are projecting $237.9 million in revenue for fiscal year 7. One of the largest increases that we're seeing here is under local receipts. You'll see that historically that had been slated to go up roughly $100,000 per year. Looking back at analysis in recent fiscal years, fiscal year 25, we collected $8 million more than our estimate. 24, we had collected $7.9 million more than our estimate. Fiscal year 23, we had collected $6.4 million more than our estimate. So what that pointed to is we were perhaps being overly conservative and had not necessarily right-sized our local receipts estimates. So, and this was part of the long-range planning process, and one of the first things we did was to certainly take a look at what our collections have been and try to be a bit more formulaic about it so that we could each year have a more realistic estimate of what our local receipts would be. So, we basically looked at trend lines. If something had been descending, it's been on a downward trend, we basically took the last lowest actual. Because we have seen a number of things continue to go down, like marijuana excise tax. For things that have been trending upwards, we basically took 85% of the trailing 3-year average. So that still layers some conservatism into the process in that, the state and most municipalities would just estimate revenues at 90% of the last year's actuals. We try to sort of lower that benchmark slightly and look a little bit further back because local receipts can be quite variable. And then the most variable among them was motor vehicle excise tax. I'm just going to make a little chart here. It's something that sort of reads like an EKG. 5 out of the past 10 years, it's actually gone down. So learning that and looking at that, it made sense to just look at a 10-year trailing average and not try to be too predictive in the near term about where motor vehicle excise tax is going to land. So ultimately what that led to was increasing our estimate by nearly $2 million going into fiscal year 27. Why we didn't increase it much more is fiscal years 23, 24, and 25 are all skewed very high by interest income in each of those years being well north of $3 million. That was largely due to high interest rates in those years, but we had frankly, we had borrowed hundreds of millions of dollars for the high school and DPW projects. And they were, once we had those bond proceeds, they were raking in interest, and that becomes a local receipt. So we already know that we've reached substantial completion as of the midway point of fiscal year 26 on those projects, and those proceeds bonds, while we saw through the first half of 26 a good amount of interest income. Now that those funds were spent, we can assume that our interest income local receipt is going back to what had been our historical average. So there we looked at the trail, 85% of the trailing 3-year average, but excluded the 3 outlier years and sort of looked back to the world before the DPW project, before ARPA, before Arlington High School. So that's why you're seeing it go to just north of 12 million and not somewhere like 15 or 16. We have to assume this. The between $3 and $4 million we're collecting is not going to be there for us in the future. We did get our preliminary state aid numbers. We got a glimpse on Friday when the governor announced some of it to the Mass Municipal Association at the annual conference, but we got our preliminary cherry sheets actually today. And needless to say, it wasn't a shocker. I think some folks have been pushing for us to be more aggressive on Chapter 70 education aid, but we knew the sort of state was facing some pretty good headwinds. So overall, we're only seeing 2.09% increase. So unrestricted general government aid came in at 2.49% increase. Chapter 70 aid came in, I believe it was a 2.27% increase, but overall, because the charter school tuition reimbursements go down each year, we're seeing far less in our reimbursements on charter schools than we did in the prior years. The overall increase across the board in the rate is only 2.09%. Fortunately, our assessments did not really go up. So in terms of the long range plan, that had a more beneficial impact than perhaps the just north of 2% growth on state aid, because we were carrying a 1% estimate. So it wasn't didn't provide sort of that much movement in reducing deficits. Free cash, obviously we are budgeting to use 50% of the certified value from the closeout of fiscal year 25, which was a record, and then we certified north of 22 million. So that's why you see north of 11 being used in fiscal year 27. What I would say is that will be our peak for free cash. Obviously, you control for the interest income, but then at the same time, that we're going to be a bit more aggressive on our local receipt estimates. That's the other, sort of function of free cash. We're being so conservative and it's generating additional free cash, and then only being able to appropriate 50 cents on the dollar in the following years. The overlay, you'll see a fairly significant increase from the Board of Assessors. We have been accruing a large balance in the overlay, and we've been working hard through the DOR to reduce our liabilities and get a number of cases closed, but in support of everything we could do to lower the override ask and the deficit, the assessors sort of provided as much support as they can for this year, $1.25 million. So we believe they still have a fairly healthy balance in reserve. And then finally, the override stabilization fund. That is essentially what's left, and that will drain it down. So that was how much money, that 6.2 million, is how much has been extended from the past override to, reduce the deficit and or lower the cost of what had been expected to be a fiscal year 27 deficit. So while it's not enough to put it off a full year, it reduced it considerably fiscal year 27. So I think those are the highlights on the revenue side. And I think the next slide is just a graphic depiction of our revenues in a pie chart form. You see here, no real major changes here. Property taxes will, as always, hover around 75% of our revenues. And then we have state aid as our next largest source at $30 million. Obviously, we are always going to struggle when our second largest source of revenue is only going up 2%, and our largest source of revenue is only going up 2.5%. And then, the myriad number of costs are going up greater than both of those figures. So I think that's sort of just another way of saying herein lies a structural deficit. And then we'll switch over and Julie will cover expenditures at the high level.
Okay, so expenditures, as Jim was just saying, they're growing by 3.88% overall. So I'll take you through just highlight a couple of these lines. So the first line is our municipal department appropriations. So that's in total. We're budgeting $44 million. So that's an increase of 3.5% from last year. We then bring that number down to ensure we're staying at 3.25% increase over last year by the offsets that we, offset a number of those appropriations by. Our offsets, we were able to increase slightly, that $200,000 on the second line down. We brought up the cemetery offset, $30,000, and we also brought up the parking fund offset. So we have 3 parking control officers, and we have a parking collections manager in the treasurer's office. We've been offsetting their salaries at 50%, and we're now offsetting them by 75%, and charging the parking fund for those costs. So the fourth line down is the school department. So that is now one line in the budget, as you may have seen in that long range plan. They are, as Jim was saying, have agreed to increase over the next 3 years at 4%. So that's what their rate of growth will be for 27, 28, and 29. Also wanted to highlight that Minuteman is seeing a little bit of a decrease. That is because of 2 things. One, they calculate our assessment based on a 4-year rolling average, which is going down just slightly for Arlington. There's also an increase in the out of district communities, and Minuteman actually is allowed to assess those communities for the capital costs that we as in-district communities pay. So a couple of things benefited us in this, so we're seeing a little bit of reduction in our assessment for 27 for Minuteman. Healthcare and pensions, that's the line right below Minuteman, growing at 8.8%. So this is the aggregate of healthcare and pension growth. But in the budget, you'll see that we are budgeting 11.25% increase for health insurance. That's based on the latest estimate from GIC. Like Jim was saying, ideally and hopefully that will change in a couple of weeks. But until that happens, we want to make sure that we're budgeting as we were, suggested at that GIC rate. Pensions, we, amongst many conversations that we were having with people about next year's budget, the retirement board had worked with us to bring down their rate of growth to 5%. So and actually now with the offsets, their rate of growth for next year is at, I think it's 4.7%. So the aggregate is 8.8 when you're looking at those 2 categories together. Also new this year is we pulled solid waste out of the town expense budget, and it now lives, you can see it's like the 7th line down. That is now pulled to this area in the budget outside of the town 3.25% growth. And with that new contract, we're budgeting a 6% increase over this fiscal. And I think that's, yeah. Oh, and excuse me, warrant articles, those came down a little bit. That was the aggregate of an $85,000 reduction. Elections are going to be going up a little bit. They've got re-elections next year. But then we had a couple reductions in several lines. 2 of them were significant. So ACMi and private ways were both down $100,000 from this fiscal year. And then we reduced committees, commissions, events, and celebrations 10%. That is also what we reduced the town administrative lines by and the expense budget by 10%. So that we also did that to the committees and commissions. I'll also just add that if you look at their current balances, nearly all of the committees and commissions have an existing available balance beyond their 26 appropriations. Many of them do not spend the annual appropriation, and they in fact have 2 years to spend an appropriation. So I just also want to put that up there to everyone. I think that's all. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead. I was just gonna say, what's interesting if you look at solid waste, and you know, we didn't even know this perhaps 6 or 8 months ago, but it is now recently flipped that we are spending more on recycling than we are trash per ton, and it's only getting worse. So it'll be interesting to see. Right, and recycling is mandated. Like there's a law that requires certain things to be diverted from the waste stream. This is becoming a significant burden on municipalities across the state. I'm interested to see if that requires any change. I personally, you know, by my way, I'd love to see, you know, glass be able to go into the solid waste stream. When you recycle glass and you think it's going to get reused, when you put it in the back of a metal box that has a hydraulic ram, none of the glass makes it through, right? It's just pallets of shards that have very little value, and then we pay to get rid of them. So it's like, it's the heaviest thing, and we pay by ton, or if you remove that, like, it used to be recycling it's free, so you put it in that stream, and right, like you removed it from your solid waste tonnage, but now it's something like, I'd actually rather see it in your solid waste tonnage, because we pay less per ton for that, and it drives up our recycling tonnage. You know, it's just a sort of tidbit of like, who would have thought we'd find the role where recycling is actually.
So should we put our juice bottles in a garbage bag?
Yes, they can't be seen.
Not the plastic one.
Okay, so just a couple things I want to highlight here. First is that, so direct education expenses, so if you look at both Minuteman and the school department, they're just under 50% of our expenditures here in town. And then the other thing I just want to highlight that I just find is very striking, the municipal department's almost 17% of the budget, but then you look up to healthcare and pensions and they're at 19%. So just something, and they grow at a faster rate, right? So just a couple of things that I think is interesting about the pie chart.
It illustrates what the plight of many municipalities face, right? Like the overhead is now more costly than the direct operating expenditure because of pensions and health insurance.
But when we fully funded our pension, that rolls back a little bit, right?
We shall see. Hopefully, right?
Indeed, I would say fully funding by the time we get there might be redefined to mean 110%.
Yeah. Who's theory of that?
Well, it's because with one market swing, right? One announcement about tariffs and a market swings 8%, you thought you were funded, and then you're not funded, and then you have a surprise appropriation again. So I think that there's going to be a desire to fund a little bit past 100%, right? Then we should probably divert some resources to OPEB. But I do believe there would be obviously a good amount of money being freed up annually for
For a stretch of override.
Yeah.
For
lowering the structural deficit, if you will, because that's something that is growing or has been growing 5.25% per year. You reduce the principal and then not necessarily have to grow at the same rate. Spells good news.
Let's hold our questions until you finish your
Okay.
presentation and then we'll open it up.
All right, and then some of the highlights, so try to restructure the budget message this year, so you get a lot of the standard stuff, but I tried to pull out some of what I thought were highlightable or noteworthy things here. So sticking to what has been a longstanding commitment to constrain town growth to 3.25%. School growth has now been collapsed, so there isn't a general education and special education funded. The single appropriation is being held to a 4% growth rate for the next 3 years. Pensions coming in at 4.76% after coming to an agreement to reduce the overall pension appropriation to a growth rate of 5%, and then when that gets offset, it becomes 4.75. Insurance, as Julie mentioned, is being carried at 11.25% estimate. So what we've been told is the aggregate premium increase, the average should be right around 11%, which means some plans, likely the retiree plans, will go up 8 or 9%, and then some of the active employee plans could go up upwards of 12 or 13%. But obviously, we have a very consistent blend of active and retiree plans, so we're budgeting for right around what we expect the average aggregate premium increase to be. But again, as you folks have been through this process and those that work on the insurance budget, that doesn't get fully reconciled until March, when the GIC actually votes individual health plan rates. But those are all going to be contingent upon potential health plan design changes that intend to restrict premium growth, and we really don't know where that vote will go or what a revised estimate will be. So until there is a vote, we have to carry what was published in December for us. In the town personnel bucket, so overall across the board, the salary lines are actually going up 6%. That's due to a 3% cost of living adjustment. Then you have step increases, longevity increases, and union market adjustments for certain titles slated for the second half of fiscal year 27. So those were the part of the collective bargaining agreements negotiated for the period 25 to 27, and those adjustments were pushed as late as they could be to the back half of fiscal year 27, and those were based on the salary survey that was conducted at that time and identified certain titles as being well below market, so that was intended to bring them up. And that 6.01% number, you'll see a separate slide on this, is largely because of that significant salary reserve budget, just north of $1.8 million. Moving on to town expense adjustments. Overall, the town expense budgets are down just over $500,000. You'd say that's, a term good and necessary belt tightening that is not likely or going to result in any noticeable service impacts. It will force a number of departments to be a little bit more efficient or be a little bit more competitive in their purchases, right? If you reduce everyone's office supply budget, stop going to the WB Mason website every day when you can probably find something considerably cheaper on Amazon if you do some homework. So there was some townwide line reductions that Julie mentioned. In some of them were just blanket reductions of what I call administrative burden or overhead. Like it lives in every departmental budget. There's office supplies, in-state travel, out-of-state travel, and printing. It's in everyone's budget. You just said, what would happen if we just slash those budgets 10% across the board? And then we looked at another budget that shows up in almost every department, and that was advertising. We said, geez, that's something that we are in fiscal year 27, and actually within fiscal year 26, we'll have the benefit of the new arrangement with your Arlington, and we're slated to be seeing between 25 and 30% savings for our legal ads compared to what we've been paying the advocate. So knowing that we will be seeing those savings, we thought, well, let's reduce the advertising budgets across the board, which is largely just for legal ads, commensurate with the savings we expect to see. And then I'll turn it over to Julie to discuss warrant articles that I think she did.
Yeah, I think
briefly
we can
earlier.
I think we've already highlighted this. Okay, so this is just a slide to show all of you this part of the process this year. So obviously fiscal 27 is a very challenging, a very different year for us. Typically we have the sort of pleasure of thinking about how we might be able to increase some of our budgets from year to year. Well, unfortunately, I guess fortunately we focused on staff for some of those increases for 27. So that really ate up any increases to the budget, which meant that the $1.3 million of requests that departments made to us We could only grant $12,000 to the select board, and essentially that's because we knew the audit was going to cost $12,000 more. So that was the only increase that we could grant this year. There were three full-time positions requested as part of these requests, and 3 part-time positions. We could not grant any of those, and in fact, FTEs for 27 are going to come down almost 1.0, not quite, but almost. So that's just to give you a sense of what we sort of had to include this year as part of the 27 budget.
So know that as you meet with department heads, we made them go through the process of asking for everything and then circle back and said, all right, now where are we gonna cut in your budget? So they're not particularly thrilled during this budget cycle. And we have them planning for what a world would look like in the event the operating override failed, right? Because there will be some cuts, not necessarily drastic necessary in fiscal year 27, but frankly, fiscal year 28, given the size of the deficit, would be catastrophic. So we've had to start pivoting to thinking about what that world would look like. So we can go to the next slide. So this is just a table of that shows the salary changes overall at the departmental level. And so as we talked about before, the overall increase is 6.01% year over year from 26 to 27. However, that isn't like the standard rate across the board. That overall average is being skewed higher by 2 of our largest departments that have the biggest salary budgets. You'll see police and fire growing at north of 10%. And what that's reflecting is basically right-sizing the police and fire budgets on paper that haven't been increased in past years. So the ranking officers union has been working out of contract since fiscal year 21. The police officers have been working out of contract since fiscal year 24, as have been firefighters. So in each of those respective years, because there was no agreed upon salary increase, the budgets that have been presented, approved, and published each year had no increases for those employees. So now that we have collective bargaining agreements pending ratification of the financial items by town meeting this spring, we were under the pressure within one fiscal year's budget cycle to reconcile budgets that hadn't been getting increased, in some instances for 6 years, or in some instances for 3 years, for the 2 departments that have the most personnel and have the highest salary burden. So that is part of what was driving the overall need to decrease expenditures in fiscal year 26, because you have to stay within that 3.25% growth cap, right? Like, just various pressures on the balloon and in the pot if you don't sort of exercise one of the levers. So that this table reflects what is a $1.8 million salary reserve appropriation. So
these are that sort of retroactive, sort of, does that reset the base or just like a hump?
It resets the base, but it's now actually in the operating budget. Those sums that are set aside in each year go into a fund, accumulating. They just pay retros.
Right.
So in fact, and we'll talk about this later, that is a fundamentally flawed system, especially when you have collective bargaining agreements for so many individuals fall so far behind, because it functions like a building block. So we were setting aside a certain amount in each given year, irrespective of the fact that in 24 it should have been when you had in 22, and 23 would have been a building block there, and 24 which would happen. That fund is just a fund, right? It'll go towards retroactive payments, but it's not prospective. Like, we know what we're going to have to pay in 27, and we have to gain all that ground from fiscal year 21, fiscal year 27 to reconcile it. So it's a lesson learned for the community at large that like you can have that many collective bargaining agreements fall that far behind and lose sight of how much it's going to cost.
You're saying the accruals were incorrect?
Yes, but it also wouldn't have changed this exercise. Right, because that's
Yeah.
all retroactive payments, right? Like the budget, like there isn't that money.
Wouldn't the overall expense budget, oh, let's assume the accruals were correct,
Mhm.
then the overall tax load or the budget would have been correct.
So 26 is, so what we've got in the 26 budget, especially for rent, for example, that's back to 21, what they were making in 21, right? So the increase from 21 to 27, that is what's driving up that 11 and 10%.
But the accruals should go down.
Well, so we've got the salary reserve, that's gonna be all of the retros up until 26. And then we still have to account for the jump from 26 to 27, which is really a 21 to 27 jump. So there's sort of like multiple things at play that's getting us back to like resetting the base for fire and police.
Think about if you go back in time, like what was set aside in fiscal year 23 should have been 2x what was set aside. Like, okay, what would have to be paid in retroactive for that year? But then what would be transferred into the next year's budget? Because that would have reset the floor. That wasn't happening.
So all of the catch up is incorrect accruals, is what you're saying.
I mean, it's still forward looking.
It's both.
Yeah.
But if you were expensing the right amount of money each year into these funds, then once you made the settlement, the fund accrual could go down, so that to the balance, the numbers, the total impact on the budget shouldn't change, it should be okay.
Yeah, 26 didn't have enough. We did not have enough set aside in 26 to make this difference.
425, 2 so it's a compounding effect.
And this is the money appropriated in the collective bargaining.
Correct.
Yes.
And it accumulates.
Yep.
If you don't use it, is some of that money, and some of that money is being used to pay.
Not this one. It's used to pay all the retros in the prior fiscal years. This is just the 26 to 27 increase.
Okay, that doesn't include.
Yep.
So that's like, no matter what, we know 27 is going to cost.
Yeah.
And we have to budget for that. So the prior appropriations, unless we had been setting aside twice as much to be able to pay for that year and then set aside a reserve that could be transferred into either the police or fire budget for a forward-looking year, only then do we not cover all of this ground in one fiscal year.
So since John and I have the police and fire budgets, I just want to be clear, the 1.8 is just covering from 26 to 27.
Covering what you have in the budget for 26, which is in fact, like Alan, you would probably know this, it's like what you've been seeing in the budget for the last 4 years.
Largely unchanged.
Except for longevity, step changes, right? Some of those little changes. So there's been a 1% increase for these budgets year over year, right? But that's it. So yes, and I'm happy, like, we should sit down and go through this, you know, and spend a lot more time.
It's like these are asterisks here because that money still doesn't live in the police or fire department budgets, right? Like it needs town meeting action on the salary reserve to then transfer those sums of money into those departmental budgets. We prepared this to show why you see a 6% increase, because if we did include the transfers into police and fire to arrive at just 10 or 11%, like how did you arrive at that?
If I may, and that also includes on the retroactive, anybody that has retired in those times, their
Yes.
pensions have to be adjusted. to fit that.
People that retire from service in the town who get the benefit of retroactive payments do not typically pay people who have left employment to go join.
Oh, no,
I'm
I'm talking strictly.
Yeah, but that's a risk you take
If you let it go.
Yeah.
But it does include retirement.
Yep.
All right, so let's wrap up. and
Yes.
Have more questions.
I think the next slide was just expenses, but I think we've we've sort of nailed this already. Yeah, so we basically already talked about where, this was really to highlight all the negatives, unfortunately, that you can see, the negative changes. The select one's the only increase of 9%, we have a very small budget, so that $12,000 increase is, you know, a 9% increase. But otherwise, all of our departments are feeling the pain, that we ask of them. And that is all.
So questions, Chuck, you had your hand up.
Yeah, a couple questions. Is the library custodian all listed under personnel? Is that gonna be a new FTE?
Yeah, that was a request.
Okay, all right, good. Can I ask another question? How much discretion do you have on salary? You get salary increases that are, 6-7%. Are those obligatory with this longevity of step, or is it someone's making a decision like I'm gonna give this person?
It's largely standardized across the board. It's so the pay and classification plan that lives at the end of the budget book.
Yeah.
Is for each bargaining unit, and that defines what the increase is between steps. And those are not merit-based, that is strictly based as all of government services on like years of service, right? You start as a step 1, go to step 2, go to step 3,
Right.
and then those tables are amended annually based on what the cost of living adjustment is.
Right.
That whole boat would float by, in this year, the tail end of the year was at 3%, but in other years, it could have been a 1.5% or a 2%. So the cost of living adjustment is also negotiated, but it's standard for all personnel across the board, and longevity is just when someone gets there, it's due per contract.
Right. So we don't have much discretion. When I see 8.5 or I see 7, you don't have much discretion in that. Okay, all right.
Yeah.
So if you go back to your budget highlights page, listing all of the things under the town expense increases, and you've got 4.4% is the total. Don't have solid waste listed. Does solid waste fall into that 4.4%, or if you added it to that list, or expenditure growth, would it increase that growth? I know solid waste is going up 5.
It is now pulled, it is not calculated as part of the town gross.
It's not part of the 3.25, it would be part of that total expenditure.
I mean, you have.
Oh, yes, yes.
School growth,
Yep.
pensions, insurance. So you don't mention it there, but is it included in the overall expenditure?
Yes, yep, that's just the bottom line total appropriations.
4.4% even,
Yeah.
or 4.04% even with the solid waste increase.
Yes.
Yes.
Just wanted to be sure we didn't put that out.
Yep.
That's my only question.
Charlie, Rebecca, you have a-
Thank you, Madam Chair. So from a higher level, I added up the insurance and pensions and solid waste as fixed expenses that have sort of popped up and are not directly controlled. I calculated that to be $4 million. And the loss in the income from the override reserve fund was $9 million. Year to year. In other words, last year, the contribution from the override was 8.9 million or something like that. And theoretically, if the override doesn't pass, you have that, so you're looking at a $13 million deficit year to year on road. Big side. So, if you have a $230 million budget and taxes increase 3%, roughly. Okay. That's $5.5 million more in income. And in one of your early plans, I don't know if it's current or not, but there was $300,000 increase in state aid, maybe you're getting a little bit more than that. So, and then some other things. So I said maybe the revenue growth apart from the override is about $6 million. So if you take that $13 million shortfall from the override and the fixed expenses, let me call it a gap, and you throw in there $6 million in new, taxation income, so the new revenue, then you've got a deficit of $7 million. So on $230 million, that's 3%. I'm not trying to be glib, but what's the big deal? I mean, why can't the school and the town reduce budget by 3%?
I think 3% overall actually would be a bit of a big deal. In terms of there being, that would result in probably fairly significant layoffs. I don't wanna speak for the school department on exactly, what steps they would take. But I think the idea has been that will be necessary, or at least in this instance, it would be necessary to trim $3 million in override failed in fiscal year 27, and then have to look at the $18 million, which is where the more significant deficit shows up in 28. As you pointed out, like once the override stabilization fund is depleted, and you lose that $6 million in revenue in the following years when, there'd be
Almost all that increase going forward is coming from the school department, because the town's got its plan limited to a 3% increase. Whereas the school department has, if you look at the two categories in their historic budget, the sped increase has actually been dropped to about 3% a year growth. And they've been running the non-sped academic portion 7 or 8%. So there's some sort of distortion there that the town side shouldn't be burdened. So I think you've done a great job analyzing the budget and looking at all these categories. But I'm trying to take a step back and say, where's the problem?
And what I would say to that, probably 2 months ago, as you look at the long range financial projection for 27, 28, and 29, the expected growth of the school budget would have been 4.5%. Right? If you take there was 3.5 for gen ed and 6.5 for special ed, right? Proportional to the size of those two respective budgets. If you look at an earlier model of the plan, that would have come out to 4.49% growth. Obviously, and that is of the largest number in the budget. That was contributing significantly, and that's why there have been conversations with select board members, school committee members, to lower that growth rate down to 4% for the next 3 years. The understanding that even going to 4% has been portrayed by the school department, that isn't necessarily level services. That is at that growth rate.
In fact, the book that you all have, the school's rate of growth is 4.25. And then we've got a later long range plan for you all that's in here that you can grab afterward, and Micaiah will or has emailed. It's now at 4%. I mean, this has been a months-long negotiation, conversations, understanding where everyone's coming from. I mean, I think bringing it to one line and a growth of 4%, I think is actually pretty great. Being in these long range planning committee meetings over the last 5 years, I think this is this was big to be able to make these changes. So totally hear what you're saying, Charlie. I mean, we went through the exercise with our departments to find 10% savings on their expense lines. And you know what, we did find some savings, and I thought it actually brought up some really interesting conversations about some of the work we're doing. So this has been a lot. This has been a really, I think everyone's been putting in a lot of hard work on the town side, and I know the school side as well.
Yeah, Joe, I think I would say one more thing with respect to, right, like if you just look down the percent change column in the long range financial projection, right, you see a lot of things being permitted to grow at greater than 2.5, or as you pointed out, like we didn't want to have a structural deficit. Our bottom line probably should grow more than roughly 3.3% right? If you look at our new growth as a percentage of the prior year's levy, it can be anywhere between like 0.7 and 0.9 has been our track, right? You add that to 2.5, like that's really what we should limit overall expenditures, but then if you allow health insurance, retirement, schools, even, I guess, the town would be within that rate. So, our operating budgets, but all of those things necessarily contribute to the deficit, rely on overrides, but if we find ourselves facing a failed override, as was established by this finance committee a long time ago through the O'Neill formula, but it just means that there would be proportional reductions. So, because the school department's budget has grown so greatly, and if you look at, you just call out fixed expenses, like you said, and look at sort of the discretionary budgets, i.e. the manager's budget, the school committee/superintendent's budget. Really, the town is 30% of that spending, the schools 70% of that spending. So the share of the deficit to be borne by either the town or the schools would be done so proportionally, so that the increased investment in the schools also leads to a larger burden in the event of having to make cuts.
It's the growth rate that's the problem, it's not the current spending. So there's a discretionary opportunity for the school department to lower that impact, still.
Yep.
But I'm not being critical of the work we've done.
Yeah.
Very impressive.
To get a half point was
Just making
a lot of
observation.
closed doors meetings.
Thank you. We had a question that came up from a committee member in the context of the recreation department, but I think it's maybe more broadly applicable to anything where we're collecting fees as part of the program. So in something like the rec department where we collect user fees and then have an enterprise fund that has retained earnings, do we have any latitude to use those retained earnings or increase fees to help prop up the general fund in some way? Or do those fees and retained earnings need to be used directly for recreation, for example?
They need to live with the enterprise.
I will say the one thing we've done the last couple of years is ensure that we are charging for expenses where we can. So we've been working much more closely with our HR department to talk about the cost of health insurance. I know you guys had a question about that in the rec department. But making sure that we are charging, even on the school side. So charging some of the after school programs, the food service department, and then here in the town, water, sewer, all of our enterprise funds. So yes, trying to charge appropriately, right? Be able to tap into those funds where we are able to.
So there's been a sort of stepwise process, at least with the public schools over the past 3 years, and we captured a new group of employees each year that they needed to offset out of their funds instead of coming out of the general fund. We started with active employees, and now we're going to transition the costs associated with retired employees as well within those sort of grant funded or fee for service musicians, so that they're funding their own overhead via an offset.
Thank you.
Michael, and then Don.
Jim, at the beginning of your remarks, I'm not sure if I heard you, did you allude to the total number of full-time equivalents in 26 budget versus 27?
I did.
It's going down roughly 1 FTE over the side this year.
One
Correct.
base number starts at?
What the total,
340.
We've got a nice chart for FTEs in here. So that almost one is, we no longer have a person doing postage, doing the mail. That was a part-time.
One out of 340.
Yeah.
Thank
you. Yeah.
John?
That's just general fund positions. So there's a grant, an ARPA grant funded position is only, that wouldn't show up in that tally, but it will be discontinued after the first half of fiscal year 27 when our funds expire.
Yeah, thank you. I know you guys have done a ton of work bringing down the deficits, the 27, 28, 29. Now, see the one that you just sent out, I think yesterday, today it's down to around 3,028,000,
Yes.
and I think that has steadily gone down pretty much since time being. So, I do know you guys have done a ton of work. My question is, if the GIC comes in, I don't know what you guys are thinking, is it going to save $1 million there or $2 million? Now, I guess my question is, you're not gonna get back any of the negotiations or the cuts that you've made in the last 6 months, that's gonna go right to the that's gonna go right to the.
That would determine if there would be savings that we passed on to the taxpayer. If I would have to make a recommendation today for an override, it would be, 15 X. But if this were to save us, instead of the savings, that would be, now it's gonna be 14 point, whatever, so that.
So you're not
The interest in waiting is that can only lower.
lower the ask for the taxpayers, you're not gonna get back any of the hard-won work you guys did on the last.
Get all those agreements first.
Excellent, thank you.
Chuck and Total?
I wanted to follow up on Rebecca's question, great question. What's prohibiting us from converting an enterprise fund into a departmental fund and taking advantage of the service?
Which enterprise fund do you have in mind?
Recreation.
Yeah.
I get the funds that remain within it, but is there something that presents us, or is there a downside to making it a town department?
Then we would own it and have to fund it through taxation if fees or revenues ever couldn't fund its operation, right? Like, we're currently held harmless, like, they don't make money, the enterprise has to shrink. Right, so
When
it's,
they're making money, they have a surplus, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
that's fortunately not always the case, right? Because the rate doesn't make money, AYCC doesn't make money, COA doesn't make money, it's really, just recreation. But then, kind of, that surplus isn't always going to be there, so there could be a risk of what we may then own for their employees, right? Like, the best part of the present they have to cover.
Do we have a historical view of the surplus?
Oh, then I just don't have the
That's
record.
when you.
Yeah.
We can have a.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything else, Chuck?
No, that's it, thank you.
Total?
Thank you. So you mentioned in your report that there's now a curbside collection budget.
Yes.
It's separate from the solid waste and it's in the long range plan, I can't find it.
Okay, so we just broke out the curbside, so you can't find it on the long range
You're looking in the
plan?
book, or the
I'm
plan?
sitting in the book here,
In the book, so that would be big.
that would be page 13.
Page 97, let's see.
Solid waste and curbside.
So there's solid waste, and then right below is.
Oh, okay, it's not the long plan, it's just in the book.
Well, it is, in the long range plan, solid waste is letter G.
Right, no, that's right, curbside.
Oh, you're right, curbside is still within the expenses. Curbside is still within DPW
Okay,
expenses,
it's
sorry,
the
yep,
long range plan.
just the, solid.
Right, no,
Yeah, so I think we could technically probably retitle line G instead of solid waste to the curbside collection, to track the second half.
what other question? So, in talking about the schools and the growth factor, you talking about school department, it sounds like where this reads, to be discontinued at this time, but is it being, the growth factor being abandoned? I mean, you could read that as it's being abandoned, for forever. And that was a pretty critical piece of, that's a pretty critical agreement. Like if the enrollment goes up.
You mean enrollment growth, yeah.
Yeah, enrollment growth or shrinkage.
Yeah,
It's being abandoned for the next 3-year period.
The enrollment probably will change, I mean, it's unlikely to be exactly.
right,
Right, and so if you were to look back, like, take the long range plan, if you looked at it before the last override. And it would have said like, here's what to expect. And then take last year, for example. We had a model that told us we were gonna
Right, and it
lose a significant amount of students, and by agreement, we added over $1 million unexpectedly to the school department's budget, just based on that factor. And if you look back at all the other years, turns out the enrollment projections on which we were basically polarized, and the amount of money we should ask for on a number that was highly unreliable.
I understand that.
And, right, so like, it created far too much volatility in the plan, updated enrollment projections are showing relatively stable enrollment. So a few students up, a few students down, shouldn't necessarily, but it would have resulted in a couple $100,000 swings either way, but really costs only increase considerably if they, if that many students show up in one specific district and are impacting the school, and you have a new classroom and a new teacher that's there, evenly distributed across the district, it doesn't necessarily increase the costs in the same way. And at the same time, our long-range plan and projection had called for what was expected to be significant losses of students. So it was painting a picture of artificially low deficits that when you looked at the out years, like, if we can't trust the projections, zero them out because they were showing, you just look at the long-range plan that was in finance committee report, appendix to town meeting, right? They're like, oh, we're gonna decrease $500,000 in this year, $400,000 in this year. So, well, if those things aren't projected to come true now, that was artificially lowering the deficit based on the growth factor.
So if there's, it is a swing, in other words, if those zeros turn out to be wrong, like the last one turned out to be minus 4 turned out. And there's,
For the whole of the plan,
well, basically, right, but I mean, it means that either schools might get a good deal because the enrollment crashes and then they have the same spending, or there is an influx and then they're gonna have, so there's just, it's increasing the risk, I guess, well, it's increasing the risk or benefit for schools. But I guess that to me, that seemed like my experience here, that growth factor was a pretty significant agreement, and this sort of seems to be set aside.
Yeah, as having been unreliable on each and every year of the projection. What I would say is if there was a significant influx or something sort of extraordinary or noteworthy, I think we would absolutely be back to the table to reopen negotiations to make sure that the Arlington public school system is, not necessarily harmed in any significant or meaningful way. There could be, all of a sudden, there's 150 students and they're all in East Arlington, right? That's something that has to be reconciled.
Annie and then Charlie?
So you mentioned the omnibus in proportional reductions. That we've made two changes to the long-range plan that concern me with that. One is that we've now collapsed special education, which the school department has very little control over, into the part of the budget that would be proportionally reduced, but we remove solid waste, which normally lives in the town budgets, from the portion that would be proportionally reduced. Is that your intention?
Yeah, I don't think what you're describing with special ed would have been any different. Right? We just give the school department a bottom line appropriation. And
Right.
like those aren't necessarily out of district costs.
But would you be, when you look at their number versus your number, would you be including the solid waste in your number?
Yes, so we would look back at fiscal year 26, right? The school department got 103 million, and the town got 45 million. You combine them, right? That becomes the denominator, and it's a 70-30. If you remove solid waste, it's 70-30. Like that's sort of,
A little bit confused.
yeah.
So I just wanted to check on that. Great, thank you.
Charlie?
Yes. I suppose that, it's worth noting that there would, necessarily be a reduction to the capital budget as well.
Yes.
I mean, let's be right, it's 5% of whatever the deficit that's being removed is, but like that is the other budget that would be impacted
Rebecca, did you have a hand up?
I passed, thank you.
Last year, the finance committee had a meeting where we, like, town meeting members to come and tell us what they thought of the whole budgeting process. And sort of the board's conclusion was they'd like to know more about it within the process. What of this information would you feel is okay for us to share with town meeting members?
I don't think any of it.
So is this on the website any place?
No, we don't typically publish this iteration of the budget yet on the website.
Because of course it's subject to change with the budget that you send, to
The
town.
main thing I'm thinking of is I'd like to do a message at the beginning of this and send it to the town meeting members for notice. Okay.
Now that you're saying that too, you're jogging something for me about, I think we have actually published at least the message. This is me coming back to this
All
whole,
all the vet managers budgets are on the website up until this year.
the financial plans,
The whole plan.
the whole plan. I think it's after we actually put it as part of the larger financial plan that we then put it on the website. Like, we don't publish this version specifically, but we then do roll it into the financial plan, but we could do it earlier.
All that's in the budget.
Yeah.
No problem with that, right?
So if you could find the link for it.
We'll put it up there.
So, but it would be possible to share the budget book itself with town meeting members by either sending an email to the town meeting list or posting it to the Slack.
To give that
I
a
know,
little
let's
bit
give it-
more thought, because right, this is far more detailed and then in a different format than what is
Yeah.
actually then presented to town meeting for
And
consideration.
it goes through iterations, and I'm concerned about this confusion that town meeting members will show up thinking, this is it, when it's not.
Yeah.
And it may be very different than what they get, and I would rather have them concentrate on the actual thing they're voting on.
I agree with you on one level, but on the other level, I know from personal experience, that if somebody walks into town hall and says they want a budget book, we'll give it to them. So, if anybody,
There's different, but the message, if we send it out, I think there's a message, this is it. Not, this is just the proposal as of January 15th, which is already incorrect.
By default.
It is.
Yeah.
And that is my concern, is that there's gonna be a misperception and a lot of confusion. So I think we have to think about that more. But you're right, if someone is motivated, hopefully that person is also motivated to look at all the other financial documents that are uploaded already and our report when it finally comes out in March,
To a new meeting.
April. So that's something that we can talk about some more. Do we have any more questions for the manager on the presentation?
Thank you. Just thank you, yeah, thank you.
Yes.
I have a question. What have you, talk more about how you have prepared your department as a sales.
So, thank you for asking that question. They have been instructed and have provided us sort of what their thinking would be, both in 27, right, which is not necessarily catastrophic, but also 28 as well, to start thinking about what would happen in those instances. And, you know, we had a meeting on Monday night at the select board as well, where it talked about sort of what that process would look like ultimately the event would fit over. The goal is we would start paring down our municipal operations to just like basic core functions. Right, in fiscal year 27, you're starting with, you know, things, it's like trimming around the edges. It's probably reductions in overtime budgets, right? Like take the police department, for example, you know, a leader in community policing. We spent a lot of overtime on special events, right, like bike rodeos, rainbow events, human rights commission events, car seat inspections, school resource activities, citizens police academy. What's that?
Okay, so they.
Kind of like a whole laundry list of things that are outside of the core function of a police department in providing like critical 911 response services. So you'd look there, the fire department would be less, no touch of trucks, no open houses, again, town area, things where we spend a good amount of money, like rag classes, but name a few, like, those are the things that are like great community facing activities, but they come at a cost, very significant. Like you start trimming away those, you look at public works, bring in a crew, one crew every weekend to go to our parks and empty the trash, because they're so heavily visited. And those trash cans fill up, mostly with dog food. But like, bring in a crew, it's either on overtime or double time. So, geez, like that weekend collection has to stop, right? It's above and beyond. That's the gold standard. We're gonna be back down to the silver or bronze. Similar for Mass Ave, like our business district, bring in a separate crew to come in and empty all of our trash cans up and down, because when we didn't, we were getting, as we're all business owners, right, they were overflowing. So it's like, we would start there, like, okay, those weekend activities can't happen. Right? We increased the tree planting budget a few years ago so we could plant 300 new trees a year. Well, you go back down to 150 trees a year. Stop treating for the emerald ash borer, like, that was a new expense that we took on. A lot of the activities that we fund through our DEI budget that are fairly new, like the language access line that we now offer for residents who don't speak English to be able to communicate with departments. We would eliminate the Mass Ave banner programs for Hispanic Heritage Month, like all the things that have been added in recent years would sort of be the first things to go in the process of trimming around the edges in fiscal year 27, and we'll probably further reduce the number of yard waste collection weeks, right? Like we had the gold standard, which was full 3 seasons weekly. Now we live with like sort of the silver standard, whether you have weekly in the spring and heavy fall months, and we go bi-weekly. We would then look to become probably like many of the other communities. I've lived in a few of them. You get a block of weeks in the spring, you get a block of weeks in the fall, right? We can trim back 10 weeks of yard waste collection and save $300,000+. So that's what it would look like in fiscal year 27, sort of like nipping and picking at things that are there, just reducing the line. Like, okay, that overtime budget goes down this many 100,000, this one goes back by this, because they're not core or critical activities, but they're great things that we do. And then 28 is when you would have to see, right? We spend roughly 75-80% of our money on people, and if you need to start closing an $18 million deficit, excuse the use of poor language when it becomes a bloodbath. That's where there would be significant force reduction, and we have to start putting all of our unions on notice. Obviously, civil service has a very long and robust process of hearings. Folks are able to bump folks from other jobs based on seniority. We can move, sort of among divisions in departments. That's when you start to look at minimum manning in your public safety departments to see if you're going to be able to put the same number of apparatus in service at all times, and if not, what does that look like for response times, officer safety, personnel safety, so that 28 is when it becomes a really challenging exercise. But that's when we really would be looking at sort of across like every department would be harmed, obviously, but there would be significant reductions in force. Because to save that much money, you need to start driving down headcount, and then in the subsequent year, you would see savings in insurance, right? Like we may save on health premiums during layoffs, but you lose that savings that year because of unemployment insurance. You're like, lay someone off, they're going to be paying unemployment for a while. It's like you don't even see that dollar for dollar savings within that fiscal year. You have to wait until that is expired and then you see savings.
David and
I just wanna put on a potential layoff on the civil service law. If you're a veteran, irregardless of seniority, veterans have to be the last thing off. When we started, we've only been on the job a week.
Yep.
And a disabled veteran has the top priority.
Yeah, full right of refusal.
Irregardless of seniority, but irregardless of rank.
Mhm.
That's on the civil service law.
Okay, so would the fact that you have vacancies in the budget book, which presumably are positions you are now not hiring because you have a hiring freeze, help you with some of those reductions? In other words, not pay unemployment because you simply would not fill those vacancies. You'd have to go beyond that. Like I know there's like 4 in the fire department, for example.
Yeah, so I mean, we're already in the hiring process for the next crop of firefighters.
Right.
We would actually probably have to pump the brakes on that, if you know, like, before they got to the academy.
And do you know whether or not we did not hire those 4 firefighter positions, we fall below minimum manning, and we would struggle to meet the national standard for response time before flashover, et cetera?
Perhaps not at 4, but then, like, if we had to then proceed with layoffs, which we would, if you look at the fire department's budget, it's all people, right?
Yeah.
They had to see a 10% reduction.
It's more than the vacant.
Yeah, that's upwards of 10 positions, and that's significant, that's having to take pieces out of service.
Paul and Alan.
Just one question about the override amount in the select fund. I believe in the last override, we included $400,000 in road work every year. Is that going to be cut in the next override?
It would be cut in the event of failure, right? So those were enduring commitments made by the board. They live as part of the capital plan. But as I presented to them on Monday, I said, you know, they can be your prior commitments as they are added to the property tax levy and sort of exacerbated what is the structural deficit, that they would necessarily need to be revisited because there have been commitments for either mobility improvements or accessibility improvements since dating back, I think, as far as 2011, was, you know, sort of been added earmarks to the budget that, in order for them to endure, would run out of continued passage of overrides.
Was the 400,000, did they include earmarks and those particular things, or was that just?
So there wasn't 400,000 for roads, I believe it was only $200,000 for it. There was 250,000 set aside for solid waste, which we now know should have been $1 million.
I said that.
Yeah, you said it all wrong. Credit where credit's due.
Oh.
It should have been 7 figures. Easy.
John.
Easy question, a hard question. Easy question. I think the school committee was very close to having a failed override budget with pretty specific exactly what they do.
Yeah.
When do you think the finance committee would expect a revised version of the budget book? So we can start knocking at it.
March 29th.
I was hoping it'd be a little before March 30th. This is an easy question.
Yeah, so what's gonna be shared is like a list of a rundown of specific services or impacts, because we're getting asked those questions now. But then you have, like, we have to do the work, and we've done some of it, to like translate those to actual dollar amounts. Really, you might only see budget with a handful of lines reduced, right? That's police overtime, fire overtime, you know, DPW overtime, reductions there, and then a few other targeted areas with respect to some public amenities, and then they would probably be, Paul's pointed to some reductions to prior override commitments that were for additional or added investments. This would be significant change.
So when it comes to the finance committee reconsidering these things, there probably aren't too many line items that would be. Okay, harder question. in the process of deciding one of the most important, highest priority services to keep, is there any opportunity for public input on that?
It's, I mean, yeah, probably through either town meeting or, the finance committee process, what I would say is, yes, but more so for 20, right? Because we're gonna be able to present a balanced situation, 7,
With a relatively small reduction,
yeah, it's less than.
unless you're proactively start trimming.
But we would have to begin that process because layoffs are almost 8 years.
So in terms of the public
process.
trying to decide what the town's highest priorities are, that could probably be more fiscal 28 exercise.
Where we really start engaging, okay, here's what we asked.
All right, thank you.
Josh and Charlie and John.
I have a couple of questions. On the recycling, tipping fee, does that negotiate through waste management also? Or is that a different vendor? How do
It's through waste management, so you pay waste management a flat fee per ton to process your single stream recycling. And then because we own the recycling, the price we pay is net of the value of our commodities on the secondary recycling market. It's the fact that recycling commodities have minimal value now, which is what's driving the cost per ton.
And I assume that's like across the whole Commonwealth, the whole country is wrong there.
Yeah, cardboard is not nearly as valuable as it once was. Recycled plastic, as soon as like the price of a barrel of oil is down, like plastic manufacturers will just choose, right, like raw petroleum, like they'll just create products from raw petroleum instead of like, using recycled products, which is a more labor intensive process.
And if it were not single stream and the glass was separated out, that wouldn't make it any more marketable or increase the value.
Yeah, I mean, they have to separate everything as it is and veil them as separate commodities. I would just say if glass, because if you think about your recyclables each week, like what's the only thing that have weight inside your bin? It's generally glass, or if you had stacks of paper, right, cardboard, plastic, all relatively light. So if you look at it, it's our recycling that's getting weighed. Take out the thing that actually weighs something, it's glass. The other thing we pay a lot for, because it's not actually recyclable, people recycle scrap metal. Right, that is like we were to take a picture of our contamination and it gets weighed, and the contamination, we have to pay the solid waste disposal fee. The thing that's adding weight there is scrap metal.
Ours is catalogs.
You get catalogs still? So there's the paperweight.
Yeah. Sears chemicals.
Yeah.
I have to apologize, I haven't really gone through the budget in great detail, but in the past years, you know, we do some departments that are carrying, if we look at the actual expense in the budget, there's an FTE or two that's there that's never gonna get filled. Piggybacking on Michael's question, there's only one that you found that fit that category.
Yeah, that was a position that we eliminated by modernizing postal services.
But like in the select board, I don't wanna single out departments, but some departments.
We took that position last year.
Okay.
So we've reduced headcount in
Okay.
consecutive years. So what I would say is we actually, despite a hiring freeze in November, have returned to a pre-pandemic vacancy rate. So this is the fewest number of general fund vacancies that we've had since fiscal year 20. So once you do go through the budget, it's gonna look much different, right? If you looked at the contract cycle from 22 to 24 versus 25 to 27, we have the benefit of knowing how many people with the last name vacant are in the budget as of January 15th each year. And we see, the 3-year average for this contract cycle as compared to the 3-year average for the last contract cycle there between 20 to 25%. So there isn't quite as many vacancies now, and we should highlight there is one other FTE in the treasurer's office that is actually only being budgeted for half the fiscal year. So it's currently frozen, and we're extending the freeze through the first half of fiscal year 27, in the hopes that we can make another sort of structural or organizational change to reduce headcount in that office by 1 FTE. That's somewhat reflected in the budget in dollars and cents because it lives as a 1 FTE, but we only funded it for half the fiscal year because we need to go through this process with really nice positions before people see within the fiscal year, they're not showing up in it now, another FTE reduction.
And the hiring freeze is through what time?
Right now, it is through, in most instances, until March 28th. Right, we weren't gonna bring on or hire any new employees until we had a higher degree of certainty about what our, future outlook would be, right? Those employees who even have been able to finish their 6-month probationary period, we wouldn't have known if we were gonna be able to continue to fund their positions. There are some positions amongst those that are essential when we have hired, like state law requires us to have a veteran service officer. Right, like, we cannot have one, so we had one start today after a recent retirement. But there are a number of positions in both the town and the school side where that hire freeze has stayed and imposed. There's a chance that once we reopen those positions are actually advertised, they wouldn't get filled within the confines of fiscal year 26 because of how late in the process will be and how long it takes to go through hire.
Yeah, I guess what I'm thinking is, then they sell it as free cash.
Yes.
But they just spend half of it, $7, where you're actually to recognize those that weren't here, that would be $1 on $1. In terms of the school department, I mean, their budget went up quite a bit over the last 2 years as a result of the last override. And the stated desire to kind of even out our salaries, vis-a-vis government, grants and communities, things like that. So I see like what we're now proposing is kind of rolling back those things, if we're not gonna be able to maintain that, I wouldn't think.
I think to Charles' point, it's trying to slow the growth of what is now a much higher number as a result of the last override.
I think the superintendent is taking that into account, Josh. I don't think she's completely rolling back progress that she made. I think she's maybe making some other adjustments.
And then final two quick things is $15 million, 20,000 households. I mean, that's about $750 a year, maybe $62 a month per household. So that is also kind of perspective. And then also if it fails, I wouldn't think that would be, there wouldn't be another attempt for 3 years. So 28, 29 might not, what is bleak is one would think, even though it's over right there.
Sorry, yes, there would likely be another attempt. I don't know when it would be or what the number would be, but the ask would necessarily be less than whatever the failed effort was, right? So
Thank you.
All right, Charlie, John, and Chuck.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Going back a little bit on what Josh just touched upon, but in the last override, when we did the last override, I calculated from the 5-year plan that the school department was increasing its budget cumulatively over the 5 years by, I think it was $60 or $70 million. And that accounts, taking something the first year, increasing by 2.5%, like includes the base, so forth. And each year, the plan had a slug of more money going into the school department that had to do with the strategic plan, quote unquote, which included things like parent university, whatever that. Are we still putting those slugs of money into this budget?
No.
In addition, because they had
they became
6.5% growth on the special ed, and 3.5% growth on the academic side, and then these big slugs of largesse.
so those essentially, like those additions, got baked into the base project
Already.
over time. Yes, like that was the commitment from the prior override. Like it was an addition.
The last override was what, 3 years, right?
Yeah, and it phased in.
These were over 5 years, so these are over 5 years. So what's happened to
ones that were coming in at the last few years.
Oh, for the years that we haven't experienced yet, those have been. So, because those were sort of future goals, like the ones for the fiscal years 25, 26, and 27 were added and became part of the base budget, but those would have been future asks have been removed.
So the more I guess is now, for the first 3 years, in the budget.
Yes. Yeah, it would have been committed, it would have been sought as previously over a period of 27 and 28, those additions are no longer.
John?
Thank you. Yeah, back to just talking about going forward, the contingency plan to get the government passed. I think it, makes a lot of sense to have a budget ready to go for FY 27 and close that $3 million gap somehow. You have to do that because you have to pass the budget in a few months. But going forward after that, when you look at like the $18 million deficit and the $24 million deficit, I would say everything's on the table. So the only reason I kind of reiterate that or point that out is I wouldn't want to say that something is not going to get cut in the next 2 years because people really cling to that. They'll say, wait, the voters would have passed that override if we said this was going to get cut. Like personally, I feel very strongly that it's not on the budget, it's not on the ballot, it's not binding. And I think that's what the law says. But, we learned from the last override that it was an operating override, but the town committed to a lot of things that weren't on the ballot and we delivered on them. But I would suggest that we don't make any promises of things not getting cut in year 2 or year 3. I think that would be smart.
No, and I have to agree with you that everything would be on the table.
It has to be, yeah.
And as we talked about this with the select board on Monday, it's even like things that perhaps are near and dear to folks, right? Like you wouldn't just be looking at the general fund because the general fund also supports some of our enterprise, right? It supports senior transportation. There's also earmarks for the Arlington Youth Counseling Center, like across the board, we would have to look at all of those things and, I certainly don't want to have to talk about providing less mental health counseling, but it has to be. Those are tax dollars going to that service or to put the second senior van on the road. Of course, that's going to result in, now we can only do in town medical rides. We can't go to Arlington Eats or the grocery store or community center, like all of those things.
Yeah, who knows?
Be impacted.
Yes, I would just say you don't want to say that something's not going to get cut, even though hopefully something, there are things we need to say, but we don't want to make any promises.
Yeah, and then, if you were to watch, Monday night's meeting, and went through the fact that the only way for the library budget, which on the town side is our 4th largest budget, to see any significant savings is we would have to phase out the branch library, right? The Fox, like in 27, we'd have to probably shut down weekend service, but then moving into 28, it's, close the Fox library, and then, we still need to save more money, we would, give back, but we just, as with the support of this committee in this fiscal year, funded reopening the library on Thursday mornings for our library. Of course, we could use those hours. We would discontinue Sunday service. Sunday afternoon is the most expensive service for us to provide for that short window of time. So like, this would be looking at. You just start paring back everything until you get to the core service, right? Look at the police department. We have a very active and engaged detective bureau. We follow up on every incident. That may not be what the police department looks like in the future. We don't have those specialty positions. You're constricting and you're focusing just on like doing 911 response calls, and if we don't have enough people to take quality of life calls, they're just going to stack up, and they're just going to like file a report online, and then you'll have it for your insurance company if you have minor property damage or different things. So what we now know to be the goal level of service, you necessarily start just
Recent deep cuts,
shrinking things back in terms of what's been added over time, what's been added recently. So it's probably gonna be some of the first things to go.
One last question, Chuck?
Yeah, a quick one. If the override passes, do you plan to lift the hiring freeze? Yes. You want to keep the hiring freeze for non-essential employees to kind of avoid any future situations that, this could recur again.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think if we're planning something that's gonna last, for 3 years, that we would continue something that started, would have been, 4 or 5 months ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sort of following on that. Assuming this override passes.
Yes.
At some point, and I don't know if anybody knows what the sort of reflection point is where.
Let's get all about it.
Yeah, just continuing the override frame just gets to be too onerous. Is there anything you can do, sort of thinking strategically, to kind of guard against that day? So Chuck think about, lifting, or not lifting higher increase. Are there things like that we need to do to try to, go from the gold standard to the platinum standard, and then we end up in this situation again, in 3 years or 4 years? How do we start to level set? A lot of these things are what makes Arlington so great. But there comes a point, especially in the situations we have, with no growth and very little business to offset the residential tax burden. At some point, does it get to be too much even for Arlington has gotten wealthier, but at one point does it get to be too much even for?
Really, I don't know when that period is, but, I think back to the hiring freeze, like, just because it's lifted, doesn't mean all positions get filled. Right, but there hasn't been a hiring freeze for years. You see, present the budget each year that has vacancies, right, that generates free cash each year. And those would be ultimately, if we find ourselves in the position of failure, those are gonna be the first things that go, because they're not associated with individuals, right? They're not people that have to be laid off.
I just think it sets the right tone. Like if the override passes, then you still try to drive for greater efficiencies, and FTE reductions. That's gonna set the right tone. Like,
Can I add something?
Yeah,
I
please.
can't not. So the vacancies are not necessarily equitable across departments, right? So I was the treasurer for a couple of years, and right now they have 3 vacancies. So they are working very hard, and they're limping along. But as you all know, tax day is coming up, election's coming up, right? They are already working extremely hard, down 3 people. But at the same time, it is giving us some opportunities to think about these efficiencies. So the new treasurer is doing that. So it's sort of a combination of what you're saying. While we would start to fill some of the positions, we're also taking advantage of the opportunity to think about, are there some changes or efficiencies or something we could do? So I wouldn't say, like Jim said, they're not going to be filled overnight when we lift the ban, but also this is giving us a chance to think about some of the departments. I know the treasurer's office has come up a lot of, year after year with this department or with this committee, thinking about staffing, and we are, and this is sort of like a unique time having the vacancies to be able to think about it, because it's part of unionized staff to think about making real different changes to what your makeup looks like in terms of your department. So
right.
Yeah.
And I would encourage you to continue doing that, and more than just a blanket minus 10%. But look at some of the structural organizational aspects of the town.
Yeah.
And think of ways to improve that, even if you override passes. And I've sent some of those to you, so.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, no, and I think that's fair. I think, though it doesn't seem like a significant impact, if you do some of what the exercises Charlie's looking at, if you go back, for recent years, it had always been adding. So stopping the adding of headcount was a significant step forward.
I agree,
And then you look at the past few years of actually starting to decrease them when an opportunity presents, which is usually upon retirement. And that's what we're trying to leverage every time that.
This is a multi-year project.
Yes.
how many years have we been living from budget to budget on the presumption of the next override? It'll take that many years to unwind the structures to create structural deficit. But it could be done.
Right. Well, that's assuming residents want it.
Yeah.
There is sort of a counter argument to that. You know, we've had, DOR has some great information on overrides. And we've done 6 since 1989, and all the first one, the past and the last one passed. Pretty overwhelmingly. So it's clear there is a sentiment for, you know, we live in this town, there's a level of service that we want. And obviously, there's costs that go with that. But I don't think we should automatically assume that, people just want to cut it. But I think it just means that we have to be really smart in figuring out what it is that people do want.
Right, the perfect example of that is take like the board, committee, and commission budgets. Like, we offered a reduction because we saw a history of those not getting spent. Right? So we show some restraint, reduce them across the board. I can tell you, because I speak with colleagues, like, no other community gives like as many, traditional arts and culture, like 30 grand. Like everything with that $7,000, $10,000, $15,000 budgets for like board, community, commission, people like the town of Arlington does that. Like that is something that doesn't even exist in other municipalities. That they're boards, committees, commissions have their statutory authority. They do it, but we provide significant budgets to the Human Rights Committee, like so that they can hold activities, events, and cultural celebrations, and do a lot of community engagement activities. Right, like our citizenry like loves those investments. They're very popular events. To your point, like they sort of they contribute to the fabric of what Arlington is. It's like, those are all, you could argue unnecessary expenditures, but the community has always supported those expenditures because they impact or increase the quality of life. Those are things we do that if you look at many other municipalities, we don't.
Drives a lot of volunteers too. So it's one of our.
Sense of community.
You know, you run out of the office of the mayor and you become instrument of future.
Okay, I want to transition, we're transition to, what can you tell us about where we are with expenses today with the idea of what we should be looking at as the goal reserve funds and
So I would say we just did on Monday night did the Q2 budget report presentation to the comptroller to the select board on Monday, so we do have that full excerpt we can share. Generally, things are tracking well. There's a few things I would flag. I expect us in this fiscal year to rely on the reserve fund very heavily for a few reasons. Like the past 7 years, we were looking at data this morning that, the reserve fund has turned back roughly like 1.35 million annually. And I would not expect that to be the case this year. Chief among any year, the risk we have is snow and ice, right? That's a budget that stayed flat. It hasn't been increased in fiscal year 2019. Obviously, costs have gone up, but prior to this most recent event, prior to the Sunday, Monday event, we had already expended 65%. We had had 13 deployments already. Then there was this deployment, and we haven't even effected it. So that is obviously one to watch. We have some costly activities beginning tonight to start cleanup operations on Mass Ave and to start going work around safe routes to schools and getting into the parking lots where everyone went during the parking ban, which we couldn't clear. So now we're going to be trucking snow to Grove Street. You may have noticed we no longer have access to the lot at St. Camillus. They rented it out to a private contractor under our noses, so we no longer have a snow dump. So we're taking it to Grove Street, where we're rather limited. We have some spillover space we may use at Ryder Street, but if we get another storm potentially coming in this weekend, and we're doing more removal efforts. We have a contract with a snow melter, which is a very costly endeavor, but we have no land that's not otherwise protected to start taking snow to, so snow and ice expenditures are certainly a risk to us. The legal department budget, we do have a few lawsuits right now that are tracking that are requiring outside counsel. Those costs can sometimes not quickly. We obviously have some pending motions to dismiss in those cases that might reduce that liability, but you know, the arbitration proceedings we were in with our public safety units were very costly. Those require, or we have separate labor counsel that handles those matters for us. So the legal department budget is in a bit of peril, but we're doing everything we can to limit expenses. The facilities department, we had a delay in getting the solar panels operational earlier in the fiscal year. They're on now, but I think we had projected to be seeing significant savings on building that all electric building within fiscal year 26. That was delayed, you know, just through the utility company and others. So their utility expenditures may not see the offset we were hoping for. We had a critical incident on Friday. We had a fire in building B of the DPW building. The fire did not, in and of itself, cause much damage. It did set off the sprinklers, and then firefighting operations caused sort of a trickle-down effect. Like this was in a mezzanine in the wood shop with hardwood floors. The water went down into our new electrical room. It was a critical incident. We had to shut down our electrical room, and then we lost power to the data center, so we had to bring in backup generator for a period of time, and we're going through the process of testing and evaluating the new switch gear that we installed in the basement of that building. So we're tracking, obviously, our property liability insurance values $100,000 deductible. So if we're gonna overshoot that, our exposure will be $100,000. If we're not gonna quite get to that threshold, you know, we're gonna see an unbudgeted expense, you know, upwards of 75 or 80K. And obviously we have the municipal building insurance trust fund that hasn't been tapped in many, many years, and I don't even fully understand the process for tapping it because we haven't had to do it. So that's something we're looking at, depending on what those expenditures come in at.
A cause of warrant.
What's that?
We can do a warrant.
What's that?
Cause.
Spontaneous combustion with some, I don't know if it was mineral wool or rags that may have had solvents on it, which
Classic.
yeah,
The other expenses,
in
nylon.
the only other thing where we expect, where there could be a fairly significant liability would be shortcomings or shortfalls with respect to collective bargaining for what would be owed for retro payments dating back to 22 that haven't been sufficiently budgeted for. So we're doing what we can now to control costs within the police and fire department budgets within the fiscal year to try to offset that impact. But that would be one of the other levers in trying to reconcile these shortfalls that may date back as far as 2022 compared to what it is in the salary of the department. Those are all the things I would say that we have to keep an eye on. We'll hear more about.
Thank you, John.
Just a real quick point out as far as like current year shortfalls, I believe the fire chief said it's gonna be 3 retirements this year, which leads to some vacation payouts. So I don't know, if that's kind of the normal course of business, but I just wanted to make sure that you were aware of it.
I didn't know the exact number. Those usually are significant. A lot of our firefighters, we only have a few left. It's actually the sick time.
The unlimited one.
There was uncapped, right? Like that liability would exist for us in the future, but some of those folks get fairly sizable checks because they've been on for 30+ years and had uncapped.
And I think that's gonna hit that by 26, so there's.
Yeah, I think you said it had the one that was in the uncapped category.
Yeah, those are the scariest ones.
Anything else from the manager? Thank you very much. been very, very helpful for us. Appreciate the effort that you put in for our benefit. And then there's the long range plan on the right. Long range plan, keep going.
Sophie and I will see you folks.
I saw that on my calendar. Also, I'll be sending through Micaiah, a budget explainer document, just, going line by line, anything that I think, I don't wanna make any Easter egg hunt for you all, so I'll be, sending that to her soon.
Thank you, it's very helpful. Yes.
Can I just make a practice for long range plans and changes to the budget to send us the spreadsheets? We love
Sure.
having spreadsheets.
Sure.
So I don't have to ask you every time.
Yeah, no problem, Alan. And this is I have a hard copy, I'm sorry, I wasn't earlier to give it to you, but here's the hard copy of the latest long range plan, which, as Christine said, is different from what you have in here. And I also just made a couple of changes to the pages in your budget book, so there's a hard copy of just the change pages. I didn't print out all new budgets. So if you guys are interested in changing up those pages, they're in there too.
Thank you.
And then Julie,
Yep,
John, as soon as you're interested, we can take you up on our offer.
sure.
Yeah.
Yep,
Shoot you
absolutely.
emails, maybe you can start.
That was a lot of deep dive, so yeah, I'd be happy to.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Good night, all.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Let's quickly do the minutes from Monday night. We can get that out of the way.
Good night, thank you.
Okay, Rebecca.
I have very minor corrections on the item 8, the upcoming budget presentations expected. I don't know if we misspoke at the meeting or if the notes are incorrect, but the library and health and human services we expect for Wednesday the 4th, not Wednesday the 5th.
The better still. Any other changes, revisions? Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
All right, all in favor of the minutes with that revision, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Unanimous. Before we get into anything else, welcome in person, Molly, is that your?
If you're comfortable, start.
Welcome, and you're still here, although I saw you leave a few minutes ago, and I'm thinking, oh, that's it. That's it. Who says this? I don't know, if I did, yeah.
Fascinating, and, learning just from the questions that you all were asking. My nose is above water, not by much, but I feel like I keep it up, thank you.
Well, let's just quickly go around and introduce ourselves. We've met before, this is Zoom. Christine Dexter, the chair, and we'll just
Dave McKenna.
Sophie Miliazzo at large, precinct 4, I think this is right.
Charlie Foster, precinct 10.
Rebecca Duncan from 7.
John Griffin at large is my appointment.
Philadelphia, precinct 8. Michael Ruderman, precinct 9. Chuck Barney, precinct 11.
Andy LaFleur, precinct 13.
Alan Jones, 14, I'll ask you about the end of the lunch.
Oh.
Let's do that. And Darrell Hunter from 12.
And Micaiah Haley, former precinct 14 executive. All right, well, again, welcome.
And the screen.
That's right, Alan and.
Al Tosti, precinct 17.
Peggy.
Peggy Bliss, precinct 16.
All right, so I understand that, we need to revote the finance committee budget. Are we prepared to revote the finance committee budget if we need more time?
I think I'd rather wait till I talk to the manager's office on Monday to confirm something on the salary portions that are making sense to me.
that was a test run for all, everybody, because we all voted for it, and we were all wrong.
Right.
We all forgot about the magic $550 stipend that, is included in the salary, since Tara joined, and was left in the, allowances, remember? So there's $550 too much in the allowances. So we have to change that number. There's also, I'm not understanding this, a decrease in the salary that isn't making sense in matching with the FTE. So since we're meeting with the manager's office on Monday, I think it's best, we don't have to re-vote it.
Alright. So that's what we'll do, that'll be on the agenda for Monday night.
Yeah, we also brought this up last year.
Yeah, it's been brought up. This is probably the fifth.
It happened last year and every one of us forgot.
And every single one of us forgot, and nobody mentioned it, so none of us. It was a tough one.
Alright. Alright, so we postponed to today, discussion on committees and commissions, so let's deal with that. So you all have what the budget requests are, what they have been spending. For the most part, there's even a discussion of what they're spending money on. And so I want to just quickly go through them one by one and get a sense of what people want to do with them, meaning vote to approve as it's included in the budget book, need more information from them, want them to come before us, cut their budget, eliminate their budget. Let's just go through it and see how far we can get. And I will start, I'm looking at page 199 of the budget book. And so let's start with the transportation budget here.
Do we have anything to put on any of the attachments from the email from Snap that can go up or not?
Yep, which one would you like?
I don't know, I'm just generally, is there one for each, or how does that?
They're single sheets.
There's single sheets, right?
Which is fine, because I have it available.
They have one thing, that's okay.
Yeah.
I didn't print it out.
So, Transportation Advisory Committee, they asked for $2,000, it was reduced by 10% to $1,800. They say that the annual budget covers things like pedestrian crossing flags and speed and traffic count study. And I'm saying, what's that? Seems like they do spend the money. So how do people feel about this?
So, you want to enter into the meeting move approval, as printed in the budget.
All right, so there's a motion and a second. Discussion. All right,
I'm just curious, we've noticed on this, across the board, 10% reduction. One of the problems we came across today at clerk's office is sometimes it's not fair, it doesn't make sense, right? Because, for example, Julie was telling us, cutting 10% of her postage or her printing, she has to print the number of ballots in postcards and such, she has to print legally. Cutting it on the budget doesn't mean it's actually gonna be feasible in reality. So sometimes, is the 200, does it make sense? I don't know. If it makes sense to always have it with 10% across the board for everybody, they're not all the same. If they're using all of theirs and it's being used for traffic, they shouldn't have a cut of 10%. Maybe another one who's not using their money should have a cut of 10%. I mean, that's my frustration with this
process. I just don't feel like it's the
Anybody else, nobody in?
I just wonder, so they spent 1992 and 24, that's what they're asking for in 26. Did they give any reason why it was so high in 25 for actuals?
No, we don't know, it could be because there was a, I guess, but there were more, or there was a traffic study.
If memory serves me right, there's a traffic study which now is in effect. The town of Arlington, other than state roads, are all 25 miles an hour. That was part of that study, and the traffic advisory committee was involved in that. And I think that's that time frame in there. And then they went out and they, so all the town, public ways in town of Arlington are 25 miles an hour. All west, except, roads like the access road or Route 2, they're state roads.
So I'm saying, actually, more accurately, that they have a reserve, they have 2,400, 24 still unspent. So I'm not, if their budget for 27 was 10, that I'm not too worried. But how do other people, do they wanna? And
So part of the reason I moved approval is that, looking at this history, and yeah, they had a big bump in their 2025 actuals. But I would presume that those kind of things either get absorbed because it's such a small amount of money and it was probably a critical function, or we have reserve funds. And so then I'm looking at the remaining available and I'm going, it's not gonna hurt their budget. And they don't have anything imminent at the moment. And usually I would expect that if they're going to overspend their budget, it's because of the crisis. That accident in an intersection, now that's that. And you just can't anticipate that. We can give them $5,000 and then we're not spend any of it, or we could cut them to $1,500 and they might be coming asking for a transfer from somewhere in the budget. So I'm willing to uphold the town manager's principle here on this particular.
Andre?
Yeah, pretty much repeating that. The way the family studies the most expensive thing, and the problem is somebody says we want a curb cut here or a stop sign here, or put a new store here, and they have to do a traffic counts and, put out the animals and things like that. So the thing, there probably are things that could be delayed or a little bit discretionary, but for the money's, well, the other thing I have to say is the traffic advisory committee, transportation advisory committee, is probably the best bargain we have in town, because the committee is full of people, we'd be paying them $500 an hour if we had to pay them. They're just, total experts in this thing, and they're volunteering their time, so we do not want to discourage those people. It's a huge bargain.
Anybody else? All right, there's a motion, seconded, for $1,800 for the transportation advisory committee. All, anyone who wants to vote to approve, raise your hand. It's unanimous. Scenic byway, second speak soon.
I have one ending. I don't know whether that's going to be a celebration. This year. And they'll spend it all in the spring. But
They didn't put a question.
there is a request in this year's budget for $1,500. I mean, they haven't.
I mean, there's not one of our spreadsheets.
Correct. Oh, yeah, no, the request is blank, and I don't know whether that means they haven't requested or. Like the town manager is assuming.
Right, he's requested that, but everyone else is put a lot of their basic credit spreadsheet. Right. They did.
Correct. So. So we can get two options, one is zero out their budget and the other is full. So,
Shall we, reach out to the Scenic Byway Committee to get some more information?
Can I ask a question? What is the scenic byway?
what is this?
Exactly what I stated.
Battle Road Scenic Byway is a group of committees in the various towns along the principal routes of battle action of April 19, 1775.
If they had said, if they had listed this as a battle road, I would understand. I
That's an
didn't
error.
realize it was not a battle road.
The printing is an error.
Thanks.
The next one is, Commission on Arts and Culture. And
So I sent an email to Stuart and Kata and said, hey, the town manager has assumed a 10% cut in your budget, and that would be 31.5, where are you at? He's got a treasurer preparing the usual report. I think our question is, do we want to drag him in and have him make the presentation, or do we want to go up to 31.5 and tell him, look, it's a bad year, this is what you get? Or do we want to drag it in and ask them if they can reduce more?
Or understand what it's spending.
Yeah, they always give us very detailed report about this. Yeah.
should we wait for the report? And then we're looking at when do you think the report's gonna be ready?
I will go, Stuart, in the date, and I'll tell him to back out of it.
The sooner the better, and if we're satisfied with this report, then.
Okay,
just
so I can say to him, look, I need a report, we don't need you to come make a presentation, you could give us your usual slide deck, which gives the details, what was spent, this is what our plan for next year, et cetera. And could you please have that in 10 days or a week or something?
I'd be fine with that, but I would also add the caveat that if there's something in it that raises some flag, that we reserve the right.
That question, reserve the right to ask them to come in and make a defense and work. And when they do the shot across the bows, it's 31.5, don't give me a $3,500 budget, and I'll reiterate that.
Thank you.
35,000, or 31,000.
And vision on anything?
You're supposed to be on my.
I move we go for division on.
Okay.
Anyone have any more questions or comments on that? All right, then moved and seconded, all in favor say yes.
Yes.
Any opposed? Tourism and economic development.
So the town manager's proposal in 3848. And they have they have requested 5,000, but it would mean like they have a chunk of money remaining in 28.6. They asked for 1.6, that was 42.75, and they are above that in terms of eight. So my feeling is we vote, I move approval for the town manager seat as the budget.
Okay.
Any questions? Anybody want to comment on that? All right, all in favor of 3848? Say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that's unanimous.
I move approval of the town manager's budget. And your suggested budget for this group. Again, it's a 10% cut. Their request is less funding.
Charlie and then Michael.
I would, substitute motion that we ask them to come in and defend their request, because they spent $300 the prior year, and only less than $2,000 a year prior, so why do they even?
Have you looked at them? Yeah. So, you know, where postage fee, $400, town day, tender promise, when you fit, material signage. And other programs comes under. For total of 3,000. Michael?
I don't know, programs, the word programs is doing a lot of work there.
About 1,700. $400 to post to the website? Screw that. Okay.
Alright, so right now we have a motion to approve, is anyone making another motion?
I mean, it's up
To,
have a committee that then will vote.
You saw, they just put it on that sheet. It's on.
No,
Okay.
I asked them, I'm saying that, ask them to defend their.
is there a second for that?
Second.
Anybody else want to talk about or to? Their list? I will. Let's see, Annie's motion first, and then Charlie's. All right, all in favor of Annie's motion, which is to approve budget as written in the budget book. Raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Remember? Yep. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Those opposed, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Raise your hand again. 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, so. All right, any extension? All right, so Annie's motion passes. Trump's your motion.
Big votes on the screen, I didn't know it.
They don't.
Oh, they can vote.
That's is the motion on disabilities. Go to the.
I have, hey, did they respond to the Commission on Disabilities? Do we have a sheet for that? And what's their current, if they've got 25,
Yeah, 519.
okay, but they've already spent almost 30. Right. And there is a shooter, if there isn't.
There is,
Okay. That's it. She's.
so they're looking for 20,000. They have 25,000 remaining from 26. And they have spent 23% of their 26. So according to Julie, they have 25,000 remaining from. They have a reserve of 25,000. So it's like,
Do we have any idea if they've kind of stabilized their organization?
No, I don't have enough data. I don't have
They
enough
were
data
kind
to
of
get
disarray last year.
to the past few years, so we can put on hold and I'll check back in.
yeah, let's do that. Thank you, Sophie, for that. The Civilian Police Advisory Commission. They haven't sent it.
There, wasn't that another one that was in the last year?
Yeah.
So where are we?
Second place.
Yeah, it was a mess.
What's that?
They had blocked, the first one presented was brand new and,
Yeah.
yeah, and it didn't seem, I was out there just.
It did not go well.
Yeah.
All right, we'll ask the civilian police. The time. The historical commission? We're looking for 7830.
I'm gonna move to accept the recommendation of the board.
Is there a second? Second. Discussion?
No, I'm reading this right, they have 17,030. Available,
Oh, sorry, I was looking at the wrong
so
one.
they have more than their request.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right. Why is? Wait, 17,000. Who does that? The historical.
All right, so historical commission, do we want them to come in?
Please.
All right, do you wanna withdraw your?
I would throw my vote.
Broadway Historic District. What people's feelings about that? Okay.
With respect to the historical commission and maybe the Broadway Historic Commission, any committee that has more money unused in their balance than the budget request, we should just vote. I'm recommending that the committee consider voting no on the request. And if they want to get more money, they come in. Otherwise, we'll be, spinning our wheels here with, numerous small commissions that. I think that would put a lot of onus on them to act as opposed to us.
Well, what's that? Well, but we have to come in.
If they decide that they're gonna
So
fund
we're
it,
gonna
they don't.
revoke the budgets, just.
That's,
That's, well, all the ones there on that sheet, that's 9 of them that are asking for more than what they have in reserves. Or they have in reserves more than what they requested.
yeah, so let's increase our efficiency.
And revisit the vote if they wish
If they
to.
wish to come in, yeah.
Alright, so I think we need a motion to reconsider the votes we just took.
So moved.
And then we'll have to have another motion to have these, at least these nine. So Charlie has a motion to reconsider, is second.
Second.
Alright, all in favor, raise your hand about reconsidering. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Opposed? 2. Opposed, any abstentions? Alright, so, the next motion is what, that we would,
I would move that any commission or committee that has more money in its reserve or unused funds than it's requesting, that we vote down their budget to zero, their request to zero. And if they decide that they don't like that, they can come in and we can reconsider the vote.
So blanket email would go to them saying.
so your motion was that we are going to ask, TAC, Scenic Byway, and Vision Arlington.
Well, we voted the other, we don't vote I'm not trying to change, we voted to put out the one.
We just reconsidered, we just did.
Oh, we considered all of them?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know I knew that.
So the-
How many meetings back? Right, consider the reconsideration.
Alright, so as I understand, Charlie's making a motion that we have the 9, 2, 3, 4, 7, 8, 9 commissioners, including disabilities, come in to defend their budgets. Is that what?
No, that's not what I'm moving. I'm moving that we vote those numbers zero, their request down. And if they want to come in and argue against it, then they can, you hear them. If they have the money, they have more money than they're requesting.
Is there a second for that?
Second.
I just want clarification, they still have until June 30th to spend.
They still have
26, right?
But then they would have to show us what their plans for spending are. Right, and we have to say, we're gonna spend this, because that's then we need more for next.
So they have 26, they have money available, they don't have to tell us any.
Well, no, but if they want us to reconsider it, not be zero.
Right, but we had no control on how they're spending
No.
26.
But it's kind of, like, that would be their argument, right, if they're gonna spend down, that's why they.
Okay, so the motion is, Alan?
I'd like to offer a meta, we exclude TAC from that, which because the number is very close, and it's good for them to have some reserves. I'll take the
Which that is.
Okay, so,
Can I say one?
no. No, seriously, this is getting way too complicated, and I was hoping that by doing this, we could not have people come in that we know, like just, gonna say, thank you for your volunteers and cut out. No, it's very complicated. So right now, as far as I'm concerned, all of the budgets are open. We're back to where we were a half an hour ago. So let's just redo these. I would like a motion for Transportation Advisory Committee Act, whatever, second, and we'll go for that. Scenic Byway, a motion for 0. Unless they come in. Motion for 0 that will reconsider when they come in.
Madam Chair,
Yes, sir.
Alan just made a motion to exclude tax from that, that consideration, and I seconded. So you should be starting after tax.
But we already voted to reduce the tax, and back when we voted.
So we have a motion, all right, so we have a motion for TAC at the dust. No. All right, all in favor, raise your hand. That please unanimous. All right, so, I want clarification on the next motion, which is the 0 Scenic Byway, Division Arms, tourism, disability.
disability, I don't think we can say this legally, we have to give them a minimum of whatever we collect.
All right, so we're gonna have to go through these one by one. Good. Scenic byway. What's the motion on scenic byway?
Motion is 0.
Second.
All in,
I'm sorry, but point of order, if I want to have the money and not 0, do I go no on the 0?
all right, all in favor of 0 for scenic byway, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3. All against voting 0. 2, 3, 4. Any extensions? Right, so we're giving TAP 1,800, we're giving scenic byway nothing. And at this point, it's 10 o'clock. All right, we'll have to revisit this on Monday. I was hoping that we would not have meetings the week of President's Day in February, but that's not gonna be the case. So, the select board is voting an amount on February 12th for the override. We need to talk about whether finance committee will support or not that override vote. Because the following Monday is President's Day, I'd rather not meet then, but we'll have to meet on Wednesday the 8th to talk about the override. And
Can I just make a suggestion that if we discover that we have some members who are traveling because they have school kids and school vacation week or whatever, that we do is
that's. We will have.
we can decide that at the last minute.
Yeah, we'll have a Zoom meeting with the rate. Unless something really comes up, like we're still arguing about committees and commissions on February 16th, we will be meeting on President's Day. That, no, I meant to all come in.
Leave the power in here.
All right, so, our next, who will have budgets on Monday?
We hope to have ours, we'll have finished all of our meetings, including with the town manager Monday, so if they can provide us that answers, the consumer understand. But we have to, because that affects all of our budgets.
And some of our budgets, the manager, the deputy manager went over.
Right,
Like the selectmen's budget, the legal budget, we did have a request, for legal, other than for heading legal expenses. We asked if they could break that down a little bit, and send it to all of us, to Micaiah, an email on the breakdown. We have not got that yet. So we can go right through selecting dollar wise, we need to leave them, and hopefully we can have our answers on the clerks. We're all set on the elections, and we're all set on the,
No, the elections is one way.
that's about voter register. And we'll do planning and redevelopment, hopefully Monday and Wednesday next week. Between the two days, tomorrow.
What other budgets do we have? Rec and
Libraries.
Libraries, rec, inspections, fire.
Wednesday.
Wednesday.
I could do inspections on Monday.
Health and Human Services.
Wednesday. All right.
You have a target date for school opening?
Maybe early then. Tell them next week.
I know. 10%,
All right, so we're meeting on Monday. At this point, I'm hoping to meet at the police station on Monday. I don't know what's gonna happen with another storm. Julie Reynolds can find out, the police department can make some, you know, they can go get horses, parking lots, and that's the case election. Stay tuned, it will be in person at the police station unless compliance tells you otherwise. We'll have budgets, ready on Monday, so we'll have, lots to do. And, expect the Zoom meeting and persons. And the next long planning committee is Friday, and the next iteration will sit up. And we'll let you know. Well, we'll be meeting on Mondays. We can update people. Does anyone have anything else?
I just want to make a suggestion on the parking over the police station. If we were gonna see parking in that lot on the side, the communication from upstairs to downstairs, for some reason doesn't get downstairs. So we have to emphasize that shift commander, that Monday night or Wednesday, knows that if we're gonna be allowed to park. You're the last one to find out. And then it goes, oh, sorry.
We all get arrested.
Yeah, that would be.